Baruch HaShem. Baruch HaShem. Welcome to our Mussar study today. This is a time period during the 3 weeks that we have to kind of begin to tighten up and nail down what our soul is wanting to do and how we can restrain our soul from wanting to, um, enjoy this like we normally do and wanting to have a lot of festivities and celebrations. But this is a time period that we are preparing our hearts and our soul to contemplate the season, contemplate the morning of the temple, and what that means to all of us Jewish people having lost our temple. And of course, as most of us have the understanding that in losing the temple, we have lost the presence of Hashem continuously with us and the ability to keep all of the Torah commandments because so many of our precious commandments in the Torah cannot be done literally because we don't literally have our temple. So, Baruch Hashem, may it be in our lifetime that Hashem restores the third temple. But in the meantime, we continue to practice our soul traits. We continue to, like I said, just kind of tighten down. And today we're going to talk about restraint because as you see in this world that we are in this time period, that there seems to be a lack of restraint among human beings in general. Can you agree with me about that? It's the old adage is anything goes. If it feels good, let's just do it. If it's pleasing to the flesh, then let's just, no holds barred. Let's just let it all out. And what we see is that the human beings that have no restraint, basically we become like animals, correct? Where there's no restraint, where we just follow the animalistic base instincts that really are a shackle that we have to deal with, and that is the Etzahara, that that evil part that is always, so to speak, sitting on our shoulder, whispering these evil temptations in our ear. And we have to remember that it is not Hashem that tempts us. It is not Hashem that tries to steer us off of the path of Torah, but it's His Etzer Tov. It is that good inclination that Hashem has put within each man and woman to follow Torah, to listen to righteousness, and to walk in the path of freedom, which is His Torah. But the Etzahara is that part of us that Hashem is given to each human being as a choice. So it's not that Hashem is tempting us, but rather Hashem gives choice to mankind to choose good over evil. And so at this time, during these 3 weeks, we have a unique potential to harness the evil inclination that is tempting us and trying to um, get to the desires of the base carnal instinct of mankind and tries to steer us away from righteousness and the path of Torah and light into a path of darkness and evil and wickedness. And we kind of see a picture, a mental picture of what that looks like when we go back to Mount Sinai and we see the building of the golden calf and how many persons just after a few days were enticed by the evil inclination to begin to worship a golden calf, to begin to worship an idol. And what does the Torah tell us? That when they began to worship this idol, that the carnal nature took over and every kind of evil, wicked thought, inclination begin to be practiced at that very moment. And what happened to all of those people that gave themselves over completely to the evil inclination? Well, we see that the ground opened up and swallowed them up. So God forbid that we don't take this precious time of these 3 weeks to harness that evil inclination, completely silence the evil inclination, and listen to the Tzur Tov, that the good inclination, which is the voice of HaShem. So today, I want to reflect on some of our teaching, our Mussar teaching, on the practice of silence. The practice of silence does not mean to be completely quiet, to not say a word. So this is not about making a vow, so to speak, of silence, but it's more about restraint of our speech. It's more about contemplating the words that we are thinking to say and making that decision, which has to be instantaneous in most situations, of whether or not we're going to just say what's on our mind and blurt out things, or whether we're going to be silent. Sometimes there's just a precious moment that we have a decision to make of whether or not to speak or to hold back the restraint. So guarding the tongue, as we know, is told in Torah that it is really and truly the most difficult of all of our midot, is guarding the tongue. Why? Because we're told that the very power of life and death is in this tongue. And that's why the practice of silence is so very important. So I want to read a little bit of some of the excerpts that we study from one of the books that we love so much, and that is the Everyday Holiness, by Alan Morenis, who was the founder of Mussar Institute. And there's so much wisdom in these writings. And as we look at the 13 Mussar, our character traits, most Mussar teachers will extrapolate something from each one of these same insights, of these same qualities. And therefore, each one of these Mussar books are just so wonderful, the ones that we've been studying, Olan Hamados and so forth. But I would like to read one of these insights from our book, Everyday Holiness. So silence, shitika. It starts out saying that there is nothing better than silence. We're told that silence leads to wisdom. So it's very important that if we are needing wisdom and we lack wisdom, that one of the first things we need to do is be silent and understand about guarding the tongue, because guarding the tongue leads to wisdom. So Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe says, the craft of a person in this world is to behave as if mute. So that's kind of an important thing. So if we can just think of ourselves for a moment as not having the ability to speak, sometimes that can be the very thing that we need to just be silent for a second. The craft is not to be a blabberer. This is sometimes something that has to be learned. Since the baby knows to talk and begins to learn, he babbles as he pleases. But silence needs to be learned, because silence is a great skill. And it says that by it you recognize the person of intelligence. And isn't it sad that sometimes the wisest person that may be sitting around as people are talking about whatever, sometimes it's just insights of Torah or whatever, but just in study hall, we see a lot of times that the one that seems to have the most wisdom is the one that is speaking the least. And isn't it said that of some people, you might hear people say, well, so and so doesn't speak much, doesn't really have much to say, But isn't it interesting that when they do speak, there seems to be so much wisdom coming forth out of their mouth? Well, this is a true thing because the nature of a person is his solitude. Only in that does the soul and the spirit develop their strength. Wow. As we look around, um, just think about your from the moment that you wake up, what noises that you're hearing throughout the day. It's in everything, even in our homes. There's all kinds of machinery and devices that are making noise. There's cars going by, there's trucks, there's in a lot of our areas, the trash collectors and just everything in the world, all of the work that's going on. There's so much noise. And sometimes even when we shut the doors and windows of our home, there's TV and there's computers and there's dishwashers and there's just a plethora of noise, and then our own noise. And sometimes it's seemingly good because sometimes we're playing like good music and so forth, but whatever it is noise. And that's why we've got to actually practice silence, because even if it's good music playing or whatever, it somehow is basically competing with God's voice. Does that make sense? There's like a competition. And so it is important that as we are going through this 3 weeks, and actually we are hurling through, let's see, I believe I wrote this down. Yes, okay, so the 9 days that is at the end period of this 3 week period actually begins August the 4th at sundown through August the 13th. Now, on August the 13th on the Gregorian calendar is the 9th of Av, and that will be a complete a complete fast from sundown to sundown. And so we're also going to be practicing um, basically just getting a hold of our inner urges, being able to have self-control, which is one of our Mussar um, personalities that we have to, most assuredly practice restraint on self-control. And silence is a part of self-control. So um, I would like to read a little bit about what our Rabbi Slanter taught about silence as one of the 13 attributes of the final of the 13 attributes of our soul traits. And he listed it as his basic curriculum of Mussar practice. What he said about silence, however, like most of what we come upon into our Mussar literature on the subject, actually is more about restraint in speech than about absolute silence. It's about how contemplative quiet figures into the curriculum of the soul. So we see that we will explore all of these teaching about careful speech. And then we're looking now at the Mussar masters and what they have to say about contemplative speech. So this is our curriculum for this week. The curriculum, well, actually not just for this week, but we've got to add this curriculum of controlling our speech and practicing the Mussar of self-control and actually silence, just silence. And as we do that, we will be able to hear Hashem's voice in such a clearer volume, because as we notice, as we practice silence and we get quiet before the Lord, this is when that still small voice can speak and can be heard. What do we see about Elijah? as Hashem called him back to Sinai, and he was there in that at the mountain, Hashem began to try to get his attention once again. And we see that there was this strong wind. In fact, the Torah describes this wind as such a violent wind that it caused earthquakes. God was not in that. His voice was not heard. And then there was this tumultuous fire that burst forth. And we know that on Mount Sinai, that when Hashem was giving the Torah and was speaking, that there was a fire that burst forth that actually melted the stones. And we see that happened when the fire came down from heaven, when Elijah called down the fire, when he was having the duel with the prophets of Baal. And we see that fire was so powerful that it literally turned stone into liquid. But Hashem's voice was not in that. But it was only when there was complete silence. And then Elijah heard the still, quiet voice of Hashem. And it's in our moment of stillness, when we are seeking and putting our heart completely toward listening and hearing from Hashem. So silence is about listening. Silence is about waiting. So what happens? What Mussar attribute has to be practiced when we're waiting? Patience. So we can't just run into a quiet place and say, well, I've got 5 minutes, Hashem. I'll be silent for a few minutes, and I really have a heart to hear your voice. And we're like, oh, 5 minutes is up. Oh, I didn't hear anything. Well, see you tomorrow. That's, of course, being facetious. But actually, what I implore you and all of us to do in unity from now through the 9th of Av, and that is to actually put into practice this Mussar of silence, which is not just about being completely quiet. This doesn't mean that for the next 9 days or until the 3 weeks are over, that you can't say anything. We're talking about restraint. We're talking about knowing when to say something, and better yet, when not to speak, when to hold our peace. And then there's about speaking is also about teaching. So once we have the wisdom of Hashem, then we can open our mouth and teach, because then we have wisdom, and then we have something to say that will actually be beneficial to our hearers. But as we've seen, the most damaging thing in life is when we speak a lashon hara, when we say something that damages other people. So let's see. So when we're tempted to say something negative, this is when we have to ask Hashem before we speak, and we're practicing this restraint of our speech until after the 9th of Av. This is going to be where we're just really bearing down on this study of this Mussar of practicing the restraint of speech, our practice of silence, is that we can just ask Hashem to give us some kind of what we call like a red flag before we start to say something. Let's practice hearing the voice of Hashem when we're around others and engaged in a conversation, or maybe it's just one-on-one, just one person. And it can even be your spouse, a member of your own family. Let's practice asking Hashem to give us some kind of a check, a little red flag of maybe I shouldn't say anything about this. Maybe I just need to be quiet. And one of those ways that we can learn to do that is to be a good listener. It's so important that when someone is speaking to us and talking, to not be thinking in our own mind, I kind of know what they're talking about and what they're going to say and what the meaning is behind everything. And therefore, I've got to think about, what is my retort? What am I going to say? What am I going to add to this? What is my opinion about what they're having to say? Or what little teaching can I throw out? No, stop. Listen to what people are saying. Listen to your spouse before you jump in and say, given an opinion. Listen till they finish their sentence. And I notice that um, when I'm listening in to conversations of other people, I can see how that so many times before a person has the ability to even finish their sentence, that others are jumping in and giving their 2 cents, so to speak. Well, you know what? Sometimes our 2 cents can be very derogatory and actually not important, not enough to cut people off. And that's the thing. It become a habit of when you're in the middle of a conversation with people, is to continuously cut them off, give your own opinion, throw out something, finish their sentence. Sometimes this is where we can begin today to practice restraint of our speech. Let others finish their sentence. And guess what? Unless they say, what is your opinion about this? Practice not giving an opinion unless you're asked for opinion. Okay? I know this is going to be difficult. Why? Because we have become just blabbers, chatters, always feeling like we have to have something to say. And I don't know if this is a situation that you're faced with, but we find that many people are actually embarrassed if there's a lull in a conversation where there has to be something being said continuously. And so what we find is that some people are literally embarrassed and feel uncomfortable if there's a lull, if there's some silence. So think about that the next time that there's a lull in a conversation. Do you feel kind of embarrassed or uncomfortable? Do you feel like you just have to keep a conversation going? And even when maybe you're texting, do you feel like that you have to always have the last say, the last opinion, the last little teaching, the last little quote about something? Or can you just say, it's been great, chatting with you today. Look forward to, our next conversation or whatever. Just ending it without having to add. Because see, when we continually add to a conversation, whether it's texting or talking over, on your phone or just, face to face, if we continue to feel like that there's a lull in the conversation, therefore I have to keep adding and be opinionated about everything that's being said, then guess what? Usually the other person then feels like, well, I have an opinion about that too. And I heard about something else. And it just goes on and on and on. And what happens is that we begin to take up others' precious time and our own precious time. So let's try to practice restraint of our speech and make sure that what we're talking about, what we're visiting with people about, really is something that's important, and not just saying stuff just because there's a lull in the conversation, or that we just have to say something. Because if we're not careful with restraint, is that many times what happens is that the Sahara says, hey, remember what you heard? Share that. Remember what you were told about this? Remember what you read about this? Share that. And what that does, if it's something particular, I'm talking about if it's something negative about someone else, sometimes we just have to give it a rest. Enough's been said, enough been heard, enough been read about certain things, and it's time to just give it a rest. So if you feel like sometimes you've got to fill in a gap in a conversation, make sure that it's not a negative thing that you're interjecting in a conversation. Because as soon as you do that, the Yetzer Hara has won the battle. He's won the contest between the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. So as we're trying to tighten down the bolts on this tongue here, remember that there's many gates that Hashem has given us about the tongue. And that is the tongue itself, and the teeth, and the lips. And so we've got all these gates, and sometimes we've just got to, air quote, zip up the lips and let it be silent. I'm sure most of us think that we have so much to say and we've got so much knowledge that we just want to spew it. And so we have to be careful. Someone asks us a question, it doesn't mean that we have to spew every bit of knowledge that we have on that one little subject. Let's just be careful about having too much to say, because sometimes too much to say, we can get prideful about all of our knowledge. And so sometimes when people have too much to say about something, it's because we're prideful about our knowledge. And so pride can get a hold of us. And sometimes if pride gets a hold of us, then we can also become arrogant, meaning that if we think we have so much more knowledge about particular subjects than someone else, then sometimes the tone of our voice can actually sound prideful and arrogant, even if we don't mean to be. But sometimes it can come across as a very arrogant and prideful if we just have too much to say. So once again, just restraint. And so this week, let's begin to just practice putting restraint on the tongue. There's so much reward in this. So remember that silence is not just about avoiding speech altogether, but it is a positive virtue. So it says that speech is very gracious when it's driven by the need to comfort, encourage, bring a vision to another. Sometimes this can mean to give someone good, useful information. So yes, speech can be a wonderful thing. We can use speech to encourage, to build up someone's self-esteem, to be thankful and grateful and let people know by just expressing your gratitude. And this is where it can be very positive. So as we're practicing guarding the tongue, this is part of what we can do, and that is to remember the right use of speech and recognize, as it tells us here, recognize that like any powerful resource, speech can be very creative, healing, but also dangerous and destructive. So even a greater source for the honor due to language is the Torah's message that God brought creation into being with speech. God says, let there be light, and there was light. Later on, so much of the biblical narrative is directed toward words, and God spoke to Moses saying. Now the rabbis of Talmud gave their blessing to speech by considering that whosoever gives charity to a poor person receives 6 blessings, but one who consoles him with words is blessed with 11 blessings. There is positive power inherent in our speech. But the word also contains a menacing power. Speech is judged more powerful than the sword because why? It tells us that a physical weapon can injure only those in proximity, while speech can kill at a distance, for death and life are in the power of tongue. Slika. So much of the trouble in our lives and the trouble that we cause others is rooted in our idle, accidental, or even destructive use of words. So it's very important to become aware and take command, restraint over our tongues. So there are guidelines. It says the primary Mussar guidelines for speech is not whether something is true or not. Oh, how is that so important? Because sometimes people feel like it's okay to share something terrible about someone's mishap because, well, it's true, so it's okay. I can just rumor this to everyone I meet because, after all, it's true what they did. Well, as we know, that is a destructive sword. Just because something is true about someone doesn't mean that we should ever share it. In fact, if it is something that is negative, we should not share it. We should not, just for the sake of shock and awe, right? So he tells us that it's very, very important to become aware and take command of our tongues. So whether something is true or not, but rather what impact our words will have on someone. What kind of harm will it have? What will it cause? If our speech causes people financial, physical, psychological, or other kind of harm, or even anxiety or fear, then we are told to hold our tongues. So the practice of careful speech is called Shemirat HaShalom, which literally means guarding the tongue. There's four main types of negative speech that are identified for us. First is the negative, degrading type of speech that can be spoken about a person that actually could be true, but just because something is true doesn't mean that we're free to say it. An example is, don't go to that party because they're so boring. Well, maybe they are, but we don't have the prerogative to share something negative about another person that would be degrading. And it's not an excuse to damage their reputation just because we want others to see them in a negative way. There's also, we're forbidden to share negative statements that are false, and they are weighed more severely. It says there's much more serious and damaging misuse of our speech to say you don't want to go to that party because they're boring, when in fact the Hoffmans could be the life of the party. So therefore, saying something that is false is weighed more heavily according to Torah. So there is much more of a punishment that we are going to receive for actually make a false accusation. Now, gossip is passing on to a person negative things that someone else has said. And so it can be very, very damaging, and we will be held accountable for it. It says, finally, we need to guard against making statements that don't come right out of with negativity, but can imply. I think in today's verbiage, we might say that we just got a backhanded apology, or even a backhanded, um, um, someone gave us, some kind of a positive uh, word, but yet we know that was kind of backhanded. A backhanded compliment is what I was trying to say. Say that was a backhanded compliment, like that is a beautiful dress. Too bad that color doesn't suit your skin tone. Oh my goodness. That, this is the kind of thing that backhanded compliment, right? So we have to be careful about saying things that come out of negativity. It sounds real nice coming out, but yet the implication can be so terrible. But these sorts of speech are forbidden by Jewish law and tradition, and we're forbidden to say negative things, and we're also forbidden to listen to negative things. So what do we hear about this? Well, our sages tell us that, according to Maimonides, he warns us that wrong speech is a transgression that's equivalent to murder. I know you've heard this. I know you understand what this means, but let's go over this again. Why is negative speech literally I mean, seriously, murder? How can negative speech be compared to murder? Well, it says that actually it's more heinous than murder. Why? Because it kills three people: the one who said it, the one who hears it, and the one about whom it is said. So we've established the law that silence is a protective fence for wisdom. You want wisdom? You've got to have silence. There has to be that protective fence. Therefore, don't be hasty in answering. And for it says, and one should not speak excessively. So remember that when we say something negative about another person, that we're killing three people. What are we killing? We're actually it's called character assassination. And once you have committed character assassination, this it can't be revived. Once a person hears something terrible about another person, it's like that word that goes out. You can't pull it back. That arrow has gone out, and it's going to accomplish what you sent it out to do. So therefore, you speak life, and what's going to happen? That life is going to happen. It will speak life, and it will bring life to all of the hearers. So I know that I've run over time. So here's what we're going to do. So this beginning today, I challenge you to get a tablet, get whatever you can. I want you to journal. This is just going to be for a few short days now through the 9th of Av. But if you truly want to harness the tongue, if you truly want to be seen as someone who is wise, someone who can be trusted, someone that people can trust, that if they share something with you that is personal, that they know that not another human being is going to hear, that you're not going to share it with anyone. Why? Because you are a trusted person. You are a trusted friend. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to ask you, implore of you, to find a place in your home, wherever it is. Breast lovers, practice this, and it's so amazing. Whether you've got to find a place to be alone, where you could shut out the world. If you have to put earplugs in because of other noise that's around, if you have to put earplugs in, do it. I implore you, whatever it takes, to find 15 minutes a day of silence, because this is where you can practice this Mussar, and I guarantee you the Torah is resounding that when you practice silence, you will hear HaShem. You will get a download from Shemayim that you would never otherwise get. And this, my friend, is called Hitbodedut. Hitbodedut is where it's a personal prayer between you and HaShem, and just the two of you. And so I want you to practice this, and I want you to be able to write down every day what you heard from HaShem. What small, beautiful, encouraging word did you get from HaShem? And write it down. And this is just for you. It's between you and HaShem. You don't have to go out and tell everybody, oh, this is what I heard from HaShem today. No, it's just between you and HaShem. Keep it right here. Just like when the angels were talking to Yeshua's mother before his birth, she heard all of these things and she pondered them in her heart. And only did she share when she was given permission from HaShem to share what the angel had spoken to her, because she had to contemplate what this meant. And so when HaShem speaks to you, you've got to contemplate. We have to contemplate, what does this mean? What is HaShem saying to me? Where do I go? What is my next step? And you and I must hear from HaShem. If we ever needed to hear from HaShem, it's today. It is now. It's in the middle of the turmoil that this world is in today. It's going to be awesome. I encourage you. I challenge you. Spend 15 minutes alone, quiet, reading Torah, speaking from your heart. This is where Hashem wants to hear everything you want to tell him, every need that you have, right down to healing, financial, whatever it is, just wanting to be closer to Hashem. Pour out your heart to Hashem. He's waiting right now in a quiet place just for you. I'll see you next Thursday, and it's going to be amazing. This is a time that Hashem wants to meet with you. Hashem Yeshua.